Hello, everyone, and welcome to this shared webinar from PractiTest, hosting Eggplant, our partners. My name is Noah Segol. I'm the VP of Marketing, and I'm very happy to have you with us today. The topic of our webinar today will be about managing the challenges of manual and automated testing together. From PractiTest, we have Joel Montvelisky, our Chief Solution Architect, and from Eggplant, we have Ivan Bartlik, Solution Architect. And I would first hand over to Ivan to introduce himself and share a little bit about Eggplant for those of you who are not familiar.
Sure. Hey, I'm Ivan Bartlik. Pleasure to be joining PractiTest here today. I'm a solutions architect and currently living in Philly. Other fun facts about myself: I'm a certified personal trainer, not currently practicing. Got into the testing world from a coding boot camp and never looked back. And prior to that, I worked in the building automation industry. So I'm a big fan of automation as a whole. So just a little bit about Eggplant. Eggplant for 2 years in a row has been recognized as a leader in the software test automation space. And we're recognized as a leader for our intuitive way our platform forms as a basis of your CI/CD tool chain. So you can see that we're in the upper quadrant for both Forrester and Gartner for our ability really to automate any type of system. And as you can see, Eggplant works with a range of different customers in many different industry sectors, ranging from defense and aerospace, working with the US Army, testing mission critical systems, to healthcare, testing electronic health record systems, to retail, testing point of sale and e-commerce platforms. We really are a cross-industry standard due to the fact that Eggplant really works in any type of system. So we're able to cross any type of industry, any type of application. And we're able to work in such a broad range of industry sectors because you really can automate anything. The flexibility of our tool allows us to automate any mobile device, any desktop application, any virtual machine, any type of browser. It really doesn't matter. As long as we can see it on the screen, we can automate it. And here you can see a few of our big names: US Army again, NASA, along with Walmart. And for all these reasons, Eggplant has just recently been acquired by Keysight Technologies as of a few months ago. And this is really accelerating our potential to grow as a company, as well as a product line.
Okay. By the way, I'm passing the slides if it sounds weird for Evan. So if it sounds like I'm cutting, so I'm just trying to work with him on that. So Evan, you're done? Sorry for asking.
Yes, I am done.
Okay. So I guess that this is my time to speak. So hi guys, I'm Joel. As Noah said, I'm Chief Solution Architect here at PractiTest, and I am a tester, and because I'm a tester, I like numbers. So I have 1 wife, 3 kids, 8 pets, and if you really are interested in how are they divided between hamsters, dogs, and fish, and cats, and you're more than invited to send me an email. Now, I have been a tester for all my professional life, even a little bit before my professional life got started as an accidental tester in college, but I've been doing testing, I think, for half my life, more or less. And other than being a tester, test manager, director, consultant, I also try to speak in a number of different events. And within PractiTest, I'm also in charge of testing, even though it's not written here. I'm Chief Solution Architect and also in charge of quality. Now, there are a couple of other cool projects that I get to do because PractiTest lets me, like my podcast with my friend Rob Lambert, or the State of Testing survey that we run once a year, and the next one's going to be running in about a month. And these are free survey that we run throughout the whole testing ecosystem, and then publish it free. And you can go to the blog here, blogpractice.com, to see it, as well as the online test conf that is happening in about 2.5 weeks. And I'm pretty excited about that. And you can go to onlinetestconf.com and just sign up, but we can talk about it a little bit later. Now, PractiTest. for those of you who are here from the side of Eggplant and haven't heard of PractiTest, then first of all, hey, happy to meet you. We are a QA management solution, but we're a different QA management solution. And yes, there are plenty under the sun right now. But the difference with us is that we're trying to focus on what we think are the real problems of the testing world. And that is, how do we manage all the information? And we will talk a little bit about that today, but we see ourselves more than just a platform that helps you manage your scripted tests and your automated tests and everything, as a hub of information that will help you to generate visibility and enhance not only the efficiency of the QA team, but also the value that we provide to our teams. And I'm pretty sure that you understand what I mean here, because Excel can manage your test cases. The question is, how do we generate that change, that information chain, in order to help people come out of it? And a big part of it is integrations. We know that there are a lot of different things happening around QA and testing, from your bug tracking systems to a large number of tools are going to be integrating all the time, including Eggplant, obviously. But one of the things that, for example, we know is that most organizations have a number of different automation frameworks. So how do you integrate everything, and how do you make one single orchestrated process? So that's what we're trying to do. We are a SaaS product, just as Eggplant is. We're also industry leaders. If you look at G2 Crowd, they actually see us as an industry leader on the trending views in there, and we're very, very, very proud of it. As a SaaS system, we are both ISO 27001 certified, as well as SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. And it's really important, because at the end of the day, you need to trust us with your information, and you can. Meaning, we do a pretty good work in order to make that happen, and you don't need to take our word for it. We do have quite a lot of very happy customers from, again, many industries, from software to healthcare, all the way to retail, government, and manufacturing. And again, you can just go over to our website and check us out and start your free evaluation. And if you're working with Eggplant, we also have a connector that allows us basically to work together and integrate them. We can talk about that a little bit later if needed. But again, we don't want to make this an Eggplant or PractiTest session. So just to introduce the systems. And I think that we can move over. Right, Noah?
Absolutely. Okay, so next I want to introduce both of you a question, okay? This is going to be a part of the discussion between the two companies and two opinions, and then we'll follow by questions from you, the audience. So I think the first question that I want to put into the audience is, what are the biggest challenges when managing automated and manual testing? Okay? And Evan, if you don't mind, maybe you can start on answering.
My apologies, I was on mute.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
No,
I'm back. I'm back. So I'd say one of the biggest challenges is gauging how efficiently can automation reduce the time and effort spent on manual testing, right? Because in the end, manual testing is intelligent, right? A human can identify things that look strange and try to zero in and identify the problem. But the issue with this is it's not scalable, it's slow, and it's expensive, right? So then the next step towards moving away from manual testing would be traditional automated regression testing, because it's faster to execute. But the problem is it always runs the same tests. It requires all the tests to be manually built, and it's not necessarily intelligent, right? With these kind of solutions, we're testing components rather than end-to-end user experiences, right? And then another approach can be siloed monitoring and tests, right? Development teams who build and update systems, and operations teams who monitor systems. At times, there's a lack of communication there, right? So you end up duplicating testing and monitoring assets. So the answer to these problems is really continuous and intelligent automation. Automation that brings together the intelligence of manual testing while still using the benefits of automation. So one of the main goals of continuous and intelligent automation is to automate the full digital experience. So here at Eggplant, we use a digital twin to identify all possible tests and user journeys that replicate that full end user experience. And we do this through intelligent testing, through machine learning algorithms. Intelligent models can identify almost every user journey on an application with no human intervention, right? And that automation, it's carried out by our universal fusion engine that can interact and control any system. And on top of that, Eggplant allows integration to any CI/CD pipeline, including, you can see a logo in the middle, PractiTest. So when we're talking about intelligent testing versus just your standard manual linear flows or your traditional automated testing, right, here's an example of a flow showing what that traditional testing looks like. As you can see, this is a very linear test case, and as some users are following this exact process to check out an item, for example, the bigger picture probably looks something like the next slide. So this is an intelligent model, and this kind of opens up the possibilities to testing that full user experience. So let's dissect this. You have the purple boxes, which represent pages such as your home page or your department 1 page. And within these pages are actions. And this is anything that a user would interact with, such as clicking on a button. So when we go to a home page, let's say the user goes to department 1, chooses item 1, but then instead of going to a standard checkout, department 1 has the option to go back. So let's say the user says, I chose the wrong item. They decide to go back, switch to item 2, pick brand 1, and add that to their cart. And then right when you think they're about to check out, they choose the back to home option, right? And continue adding different items to their cart. So this more closely replicates the true end user experience than the previous slide. So when choosing an automation tool, it's important to choose one that's able to intelligently mimic those messy real user behaviors. And that's pretty much all I have.
Sorry, I was obviously muted. So I look at it, and I understand even what you're saying about not making or adding a little bit more randomness so that we look into what user does, and that is a big issue with automation today. But I want to talk about another one that I usually see. And one of my jobs in practice is actually pretty cool. I get to talk with most of our customers to make sure that they're working with the system together and correctly, and also getting new ideas for new functionality. And one of the things that we talk about is, hey, how are you integrating your automation, and what challenges do you have? And I think that 2 out of every 3 organizations that we go into, they talk about the big misconception about how automated testing projects actually work. Because if we go to a manager, they say, hey, you know what? We want to reduce costs, and so we're going to be automating stuff, and we will be able to increase the size of our development without increasing the size of our QA. Those are the good places where they're not saying we're going to fire all of you. And most times what happens is that people think that a automation project looks like something like this, where so we started and we did our test planning, and so we came up with a bunch of manual test cases, and then we're just going to start automating them. Okay, and we'll start with the first one, and we'll finish when we're done with all the test cases we have. Like, that can happen because obviously we're adding more functionality all the time. But let's say for a second that yes, we're going to automate everything, and then everything will run every time, and we get magical reports, and we find all the bugs in the system. And this is how management, or this is how external stakeholders actually see automation projects. And that's a big issue, because in most organizations actually it looks like this, where let's say that, you know what, you get to a company and you already have some legacy test cases. Okay, so the project exists already, and you have your legacy manual test cases, and let's say that you're starting your work and you know that you will want to do automation, but first of all, you clean up a little bit of your manual test cases, and you end up having your manual test reports. And because one of your charters when you were hired as a lead or a manager was to implement automation, then you start with a POC. So you bring one automation framework, It might be Eggplant, it might be Selenium, it might be anything else, doesn't really matter. And so we work with that framework and we have some outputs in there, but we hit a wall for any reason. It might not even be a wall. It might be that we need to go back to our releases. And so we stop with the automation. And so we have now some isolated manual test reports, and we might or might not have some output from the automation that we have. And it might be 3 months from now, it might be 3 years from now, we go back over to work with automation and we do a couple of additional POCs, and we understand that we're not going to be able to work with only one framework. So we bring a couple of more frameworks. And after bringing them, we end up with even a bigger mess because we have isolated manual test reports and we have isolated test reports from platform A and isolated reports from platform B. And that idyllic place where we wanted to get, where, oh, we can reduce the amount of manual test cases because we have automation instead of it, it's more complicated than that because it's hard to put everything together, and you end up, when you report to management as a tester, saying, well, yes, we're ready, but I cannot give you a dashboard because we have separate frameworks, some of them running on Jenkins, some of them running on their own places, and it's hard to put everything together. So this is a very, very big challenge that I see, where even if we do automation right, in the sense that we do have right test cases and we mix them with our manual test cases, it's still very hard to provide value based on that. And so we look unprofessional because we end up saying, hey, we are going to be given results based on what I think is happening in many places, and people don't really make sense. So one of the things that we're seeing quite a lot is that it makes sense to have a little bit of what we call architecture of your testing efforts. And we don't mean only automation, we mean your overall testing efforts. And without going into too much detail, because again, I can talk about this for literally days. I have a workshop that I do for that. But it all starts by having one, either a person or a small center of excellence group orchestrating and coordinating all the testing efforts, saying, okay, so this needs to be manual, maybe now, maybe all the time, maybe we can mitigate that. This makes sense to be doing automated on platform X, this on platform Y. Let's make sure that we have coordination between the platforms. Then you make sure that you advance your shared goal. And because everything is being coordinated, then it's easier to do it. And then you generate team-wide visibility into everything that your automation is providing. And you also integrate that with your manual efforts. So you end up having kind of an integrated quality visibility platform that it's really hard to achieve if you did not plan that up front. So trying to plug automation, like many of our managers try to say, hey, go ahead and do it. It sounds right, but it's close to impossible. And in the end of the day, it's very, very frustrating because it's harder to make everything work together if you didn't plan ahead. So that is if I need to choose, this is the challenge that I say we should also concentrate on. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Next, I'd like to ask both of you a question, and then obviously we'll take some more questions from the audience. This is one that we had up front. We were sent it before. So the first question would be, how would you approach development when do not want to include the unit and integration as part of the overall automation reporting? Okay, this one is a common phenomena. So how would you approach it? Evan, do you have any answer for this?
I could jump into that. I think an important piece of this is making sure all of your reporting is centralized in one tool, whether you're using your automation tool for your reporting or your test case management platform to have those centralized reporting. It all should be centralized, so you're not jumping from one place to the next, analyzing different parts of your overall testing. So, if you're using PractiTest and you have reporting there, make sure that your automation reporting is integrated to PractiTest, so you have one centralized location for everything having to do with your reporting.
Great, thanks. Joel, do you have a different approach?
Obviously, I like the solution from Evan, but sometimes even that doesn't really work. because, okay, so you try to put everything together, but how do you convince those guys to invest the time that they need to do it? Because one of the biggest problems is if you're running something, let's say on Jenkins or Circle or whatever, they will need to put the extra effort in order to pass it along to someone else, I mean that PractiTest or whoever else it is. I think that one of the things that we need to use as testers and test managers and leads is we need to use the power of our management. And what I mean by that is start by adding your stuff into a place that gives a lot of visibility. Okay, create dashboards. And if I was talking about the dashboards that integrate all the different automation types, it's okay if you just start with your manual and automated testing that you do, let's say your nightly build or your weekend build or your functional test on the CI platform, and then make it very, very visible. Make it extremely visible to your management, and make sure that they know that there are other things that could be added in there, but they're not there because you don't have the power to put them there. So it's basically like saying, hey, yes, you could be getting even more value from the automation of other teams if you can help me get them to put it there, because it's something that I cannot do myself. And it sounds a little bit sleazy because it's basically going up to our parents to get our siblings to do something for us. But if you don't have the power to get others to do it for you, then sometimes it helps. So try to get some management pulling in that. And I've seen it work a number of times.
It's a very good point. Managing the reporting is a job on its own. Yeah.
Great. Thank you both. We have another question coming. Again, one prepared, then we'll keep the next one from the audience. We'll take this one first. So are there any recommendations when we need to include different integration frameworks? Joel, maybe you can start with this.
Yeah. The biggest point here is how do you get coordination? Because it's very easy to get lost. Meaning, let's say that I'm testing something with a robot framework, because there's no way that I can actually do it using the UI, and it makes a lot more sense to do it with the APIs. But then I want to just plug Eggplant in order to do quite a lot of the functional testing in there. So you need to look into the project in a holistic way, where you say, I don't care if I have multiple tools running together, I can use stuff from one in order to fit into the other. Problem here is that you might have different teams working with each one of the different frameworks. So again, you need to have coordination. So this is another one of those points where it makes sense to have a centralized team that is orchestrating and saying, okay, you know what, assume that you will get the system in this state because you know that the other framework actually is going to bring it up to this state. So if you are able to get that coordination happening, it'll be a lot easier than if you just try to get everyone working by itself.
I would completely agree. You may have different sections of your team who specialize in different frameworks, but the communication between those members of your team is essential when you're integrating different frameworks, especially in the automation space. When teams have existing frameworks, such as Python or Java, before moving towards a more robust automation tool, we don't want you to give up those existing assets. We want you to be in constant coordination with the Eggplant experts to ingest those assets and integrate, right? So then they're working in tandem as opposed to separately. So communication between your team is essential for that.
Absolutely agree. I think that's very good points. The next one, I'm going to ask a different question from the audience. Any specific, you've mentioned dashboards before, are there any specific KPIs or metrics that you recommend?
Oh, I'm going to let Evan answer that.
Sure. So we could start with the really broad KPIs, and then we go more granular. So broad is pass fail, right? That's your most important KPI you have to track. So that's the really simple one. And then KPI in terms of performance, right? It's not only, did this test completely fail from a functional standpoint, but also my KPI for performance speed, right? If I have a KPI that I am expecting a certain request within 5 seconds. I have to set that within my automation test. So if it takes 6 seconds to finally receive a certain request, right, that's considered a failure. Even though the request was received in 6 seconds, that's still an essential performance KPI that I need to track. And then the last one that I think super important is coverage. Am I really testing that? I've talked about the full end user experience quite a bit during my initial presentation, but am I testing that full end user experience? Do I have the coverage metrics that allow me to gauge if I've tested those particular paths, those particular possibilities? And if I've added test cases, if I've added to my scope of testing, am I able to accurately measure if those areas in my application have been tested? So those are just a few KPIs I like to track.
I think those are pretty good ones. I want to add another couple of them. First of all, one of the things that I like keeping track is how is my automation progressing, meaning I usually start with manual test cases that I'm not going to be naive enough in order to say that I can automate one-to-one. But let's say that I started with a database of test cases that has about 500 test cases, and I identified that I have about 300 that I can automate in one way or another. So I like to track how am I going along with my automation efforts, because you want not to get stuck, meaning it's important to continue adding more and more into your automation. And obviously, as you generate more test cases for new functionality, then you will add more testing to that. But always make sure that you're increasing not only your coverage, but your overall automation infrastructure. Now, one of the things that I learned in one of the last online test comps from my friend Teran Kinsbrunner from Perfecto is that not only should you measure how much you increase your test cases, but you should also keep an eye on which test cases do you want to keep having. And he opened my eyes to the concept of, hey, you know what? Sometimes it's perfectly okay just to retire an automation script because it gets corrupted very easily and it's not finding a lot of bugs by itself. So try to keep that measurement, meaning when was the last time that one of your scripts found something and how much maintenance do you need to invest on it? Because it might be the case that you want to just retire a specific script because it's not worth having it anymore. That's a pretty cool one. And again, one of the things that I also want to say is that we need to be very careful also with the KPIs. Here I'm going to take either a popular or unpopular stance, depending on where you stand on this. But if I go over to what Michael Bolton always says, you should be careful with what you measure because it will increase. And on purpose, I'm not saying improve. You don't want to create more automated test cases just because. You want to make sure that you're working towards your goals. And as Evan was saying, yeah, it's not, if you continue adding more and more test cases, it will only increase the amount that it takes to run them. So make sure that you measure the correct things, because sometimes you might actually walk into a trap because you're measuring the incorrect things. If I'm only measuring how many test cases I have and I want to increase the number of test cases, it's not necessarily saying anything about my coverage efforts or the stability of my application or anything at all. Okay, so it's a double-edged sword on that sense.
Mm-hmm. I actually really like that because a big part of testing is also monitoring. We have to make sure we monitor our application. We're testing we're testing what really applies to real users, what really matters to real users. So if we have a particular unit test that never fails, but it's also not really applicable to what users are doing in our application, we have to adjust our testing constantly through monitoring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need to make sure that we're adding value with what we're doing and not only adding time to the runs.
Mm-hmm.
I think this leads us to our next question, which is, what is the biggest mistakes you've seen in your experience? Not just in regards to measuring, but you just mentioned this, so that your answer can also address this.
Mm-hmm.
Who starts?
I could start. I'd say a big mistake in terms of what I've seen people making decisions or teams making decisions on automation tools is choosing scriptless automation, tools that market themselves as you don't really need to do any of the work. Our tool makes it super easy with no scripting necessary or anything. But the reality of that way of forming automated testing is you have less control over what you're testing. You have less control to make dynamic test cases, customized frameworks, right? So tools that really market scriptless automation, they're not as sustainable as those that take maybe a low code approach that allows you to have a little more control over those very customized and dynamic test cases. So that's one of the biggest mistakes I see on a day-to-day basis when talking to prospects who are evaluating automated tools.
And I can relate to that. If you're a dinosaur enough, then you remember a tool called QTP, Quick Test Professional from Mercury. Mm-hmm. And I was the QA manager for that team about 15 years ago. And I remember how mad we used to get when we heard our salespeople trying to sell record and replay as a solution. Because mm-hmm. every one of us as a professional tester knew that you can record something in order to get the IDs of your entities, in order to get your XPath better. But if you don't write code around that, it's not going to be manageable. And the first time it breaks is the last time you run it. So mm-hmm. I totally agree with that. I think that another issue that we see is that people don't understand that writing automation is writing code. And here I go and around what you're saying, meaning when you have someone who doesn't have the slightest idea of what a script is or how can you don't need to know, again, you don't need to have a degree in computer science, but you need to have at least some training and some experience in writing good scripts and reusing them and the language that you're going to be working. Because if everything that you're going to be doing is just getting recorded scripts and then trying to tweak them, then your code is going to be very, very bad. Meaning you should have a person who's a testing expert defining what the test should do, but then you should have someone who knows how to write good scripts or at least maintain good scripts in order to make sure that whatever you wrote is good enough, maintainable enough, scalable enough, you can reuse it enough. So we need to treat automation projects as, if not coding projects, at least scripting projects. Okay, and don't assume that someone who's good at testing manually will have the skills or even the mindset in order to go into scripting. Now, scripting is not rocket science. If I learn how to do it, everyone can learn how to do it, but you need to pass that process of learning how to do it. Okay, because if you don't have any skills, you're going to be writing pretty bad scripts or maintaining pretty bad scripts. So that's a big mistake.
Great. Thank you both for this. I think it was very meaningful. We have one last question to address, which is, do you have any recommendations when we need to include different integration framework, either because they come from different teams or because different technologies in use? How do we go with this?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Evan.
I was taking the questions first for the previous ones. I figured we'd just keep that going. And you could build off of that. So I think I mentioned this before, but just the ability to ingest existing assets into an automation framework is so important because these teams, they have existing Python, Java, or Selenium, and when you move to a more robust tool, it doesn't mean you have to scrap all of that work. So having the integrations, the ability to integrate with your existing frameworks is so important. So then you can just build off of what you already have, as well as having a sufficient API testing capability. The ability to integrate through APIs is super important. So you can integrate with tools like PractiTest as well as any other CI/CD framework. So that's what I would say is important when taking into consideration integrations.
I like that, and yeah, I think that you need to be able to integrate from the low level, and API it's an option on that. But when I look into integration, I think that if I need to choose, the most important thing to integrate is going to be the visibility, the communication, the reporting. And then how can I make sure that when I'm reporting to my management, they will be able to compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges, in the sense even that if you're going to be reporting on coverage, usually you're going to be doing it based on the modules in your application. Make sure that you have some naming conventions for that, so that at least you can say, hey, everything for the login mechanism or everything for the reporting mechanism, and everything, meaning you won't have one person calling it reporting, the other person calling it dashboards, and you assuming that your management will understand it's the same thing. So I think that if I need to choose where to start, I would integrate first of all on the reporting and visibility parts. Then, as you said, Evan, reuse as much as you can. Sometimes, for example, you already have a framework that is populating data or bringing environments up. Sure, go ahead and reuse it. Find the best way where you can wrap that code into something that can be run by the other framework so that you have it in there, or just generate stuff like that. But it's kind of weird, because what I'm saying is start from the top down on the reporting, and then you can start as well from the bottom up and just integrate the moving parts as well. But if I need to choose, I usually start with reporting.
Great. Thank you both. Those were the last questions we wanted to address today. We, of course, have recorded the session, so we will share it with everyone who attended today and other people who were not able to attend but have signed up and shown interest. If you have any questions on approving for our speakers, you can contact both Joel and Evan. You will get the presentation, hence with their emails. And we are very, very happy to have you with us today. And thank you, everyone. Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Evan.
Hey, Evan. Thanks for being here. And thanks, Noah, for facilitating.
No problem. It was a pleasure to be here. And maybe next time I could join your podcast. We could continue this conversation.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Right,
thank you very much.
Take care.